Hi, everybody. Welcome back to That Makes Sense. You found the podcast where we break down consumer industry trends into everyday speak and have a little fun while we're at it. It's not a huge news flash, but recent reports point to the economy moving back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure many of us are hoping that that's an indication that several other parts of life will return to quote unquote normal as well. You know, that said, so many trends have accelerated over the last year. Things like digital adoption, virtual collaboration, you're looking at it right now, and food delivery have simply just blown up. You know, all of this begs the honest question of whether consumer expectations are just forever changed. So today we explore the fundamental question of where and what consumers will eat going forward. While we were all at home, many Americans started cooking more. And now that restrictions are easing, restaurants hope people jump at the opportunity to sit down for a meal out. But recent findings from a Deloitte consumer survey indicate that might not yet be the case for everyone. So what does this all mean for the food industry? Well, I got two special guests joining me today to break down this. My first guest is sustainable chef Joel Gamoran, who has written a cookbook called Cooking Scrappy and starred in the hit TV show, named appropriately, Scraps. He also is the founder and head chef at Homemade, which offers personalized virtual cooking experiences led by professional chefs, many of which are free. Our second guest is Justin Cook, who leads research for the consumer products sector within Deloitte's Consumer Industry Center, including the survey that I just mentioned. So thank you both for joining me. Before we get moving, could you just introduce yourselves to the audience and tell us a little bit about your work? Joel.
Thanks for having me, Bobby. So I'm a chef. I worked in restaurants growing up and really had that fine dining experience and training, but really found out that my true passion and love lied with education and inspiring people to cook more. So I was the head chef for Sur La Table for 10 years. I ran the biggest cooking school in the country and have taught thousands of home cooks how to cook. So I feel like my finger's on the pulse of what people are thinking about at home and what they're able to kind of digest and dive into, no pun intended. So thrilled to be here and add some perspective.
Justin, how about you?
Yeah, let me jump in. So I'm Justin Cook. I'm part of Deloitte's Research and Insights group, and more specifically in the Consumer Industry Center, where I run our consumer products research. And I think I have one of the better jobs out there. I get to ask really challenging, difficult questions. And if I get good enough answers, I can help our clients understand better about how the world is changing. And in this period of COVID for the last year, we've been running this major study on the global state of the consumer tracker. And it's helped us uncover all sorts of different insights about what's happening with the consumer, including some that I want to talk about today.
Nice. Well, I love the opportunity for a lot of food puns in this episode. Joel, you already had one. So why don't we start by, are you ready for it? Digging in to the survey findings. So we got that headlining stat. Half of consumers surveyed told us they are going to cook more after the pandemic is over compared to what they were doing back pre-pandemic and 2019. I mean, I know I'm cooking at home at least 5 nights per week, and the other nights I'm ordering in. I might be going out to dinner this weekend. Still, we'll see. So Justin, what's the big deal? What else came out of that survey that was either surprising or interesting?
Yeah, and this whole thing maybe is a little bit of a surprise, depending on what your assumption was about what would happen to the world when the health crisis was over. Would it go back to normal? Or would some of these things that we've all been kind of forced to do, but maybe kind of decided that we liked or formed a new habit around, were those going to stick? So that's been one of the biggest questions out there. And we added a whole battery of different activities that were of interest to consumers and certainly of interest to consumer products companies to find out where consumers stood, where they in their minds thought that they would be headed. It was a little surprising. If you look at something like cooking at home or buying fresh food, part of the narrative out there is that maybe we're all tired of doing that, been cooped up at home and having to cook. But really, we're finding that relative to 2019, before the pandemic, there's this big group of consumers that think that they're going to do it more. On the other side of things, when that comes to dining out, there's the core group of consumers that, of course, really want to go back out, and I'm among them as well, but there's others that are still a little bit hesitant. putting that in context, the reason that that seems like such a big deal is if you go back like decades, the trend has been the opposite. If you go back to 1960, there was a lot of eating food at home. There was very little, relatively speaking, eating out at restaurants. And year by year, decade by decade, that has changed. That has come closer together. There's been less eating at home, more eating out at restaurants until it was essentially tied. And the pandemic is one thing, but it's kind of a one-off. We all had to cook. But if we find that consumers are moving in the other direction after the pandemic, it's pretty significant. So I know when I got some of this data, I was lucky enough through a mutual Deloitte associate, Josh Mellinger, to know Joel. And I asked to see if Joel could make any sense of this data as well.
Yeah. So Josh is a great guy and connected Justin and I. And
I know Josh. Nice.
He's a stud. He's a good dude. And he grew a pandemic beard, which I told him to keep, but he shaved it. Bummer. But when Justin showed me the info, I mean, we spent an hour on the phone and I asked for another call because we only made it one slide in because it was so fascinating to me as a chef, as someone who's in front of home cooks. 50% of the people that were polled said they're going to cook more after the pandemic. I actually thought a lot more people would adapt and cook after the pandemic, but half seemed high, really, really high. To Justin's point, everything up until the pandemic was the experiential economy, right? 20s and 30s, it's all about experiences. It's all about going out. You know, we're not spending so much on houseware as much as we are on trips, shows, tours, things like that. And so the values that millennials and below hold are, I want to pay for experience. I don't necessarily want to pay for in the house. So to Justin's point, the fact that that flipped in 1 year, which is really overnight, let's just call a spade, to rewind back to the 60s, is jarring. But to me, not shocking, because if you think about cooking, the number one value it gives to people is you can save a lot of money by cooking at home. And you eat a lot healthier by knowing what you're cooking. So those two big things are huge, huge priorities for people. And they got a taste of it over the pandemic. They were forced to get a taste of it. The pandemic was a gateway drug to cooking. A bunch of people said, wow, there's way more money in my account. Wow, I feel so much better. And all of a sudden, here we are today where cooking is being more valued and people want to pursue it onward.
Yeah, it's much talked about, but the kind of K-shaped recovery that we're likely to experience here, it's important to remember that there is this group of millions of folks that are going to exit the pandemic worse off than they were before. And that's where cooking being cheaper, as you mentioned, can really play a role. And I think that is influencing some of the consumer thinking for that group around what they're going to do after the pandemic.
So you mentioned that economic pressure. What else might keep this as a trend that's sticky going forward? I sort of get why we got there, but why are 50% of the people saying they're staying there other than it's healthier and it's cheaper?
Yeah, there are other reasons. So a big one is structural. We're working from home, our homes right now. There's expected to be quite a lot of that that's still happening after the pandemic, at least more flexibility and more working at home than there was in 2019. And if you're not going into the office, you're not grabbing that breakfast at your local coffee shop, you're not going out to lunch with some of your colleagues, you're definitely missing your happy hour. And so those are all meal occasions that might have been eaten out that will now be eaten at home. Similarly, if virtual work has an effect on business travel, the airports and hotel meals are also going to be out of the mix.
Yeah, it's interesting. About 6 months in, I had a breakdown with my wife, and I'm like, our house is too small. And we have 2 kids running around, and we're like, so I call the contractor, and I'm like, what will it take to expand? And he gave me an astronomical quote, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, well, do you realize how busy we are? He said, we have never been busier. And what that said to me and what he told me is that everyone is expanding their homes. Everyone is investing in their space, right? To Justin's point, where am I going to work? Where are the kids going to play? And when you invest in your home, you're thinking, 3-5 years down the line, you're going to be spending way more time in that home. That's why you're investing. And so the home economy has almost replaced the experiential economy. And I do believe the structural change is here to stay for a lot of people. Now, I want to say that there is going to be a roaring 20s moment.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
The world is there's going to be a moment where I'm on a beach somewhere, we're all eating street food, some in some cool place. But I believe that we've already been exposed to the results of the pandemic and how its effect on what we eat took place. And I actually think it's in our DNA at this point. They say it takes 90 days to build a new habit. We had a year of it. I think it's built in at this point.
You mentioned like the big investments at home, but it's even in smaller investments as far as countertop appliances, just small appliances, things that help us cook easier. People invested in those. Sales went up about 30%. People have invested in their knowledge as well. Most of us learn how to do things on good internet shows and other cooking classes, but there's also cookbook sales that are way up. So people have, in many ways, made investments in the cooking experience, and that'd be part of what continues to fuel it.
Can we talk about that for a sec, Justin? Because I think you hit on a really important point, which is I work with a lot of brands, sponsors, people that I work to tell their story. And I will tell you, most of them don't have inventory. I'll give an example, an amazing brand that I love, Breville. They do appliances, right? They do juicers and blenders and things like that. They called me up. We want to do some virtual cooking classes together. They literally don't have anything to push. So the question is, well, then what are we doing? Why are we talking to consumers? And so a lot of these companies, whether they're a CPG brand or a food brand or an appliance brand, they've had more people come to their website in the past year than they've ever had before. So it's not about sales for them right now. It's about retention. After this pandemic ends, how do you keep these people interested? How do you keep them informed? And I think that is a major shift and why I've shifted my business. But to your point, Justin, people are hungry for more than just a blender. They want to stick around and be a part of your community because you're serving something valuable to them and they're listening.
You made a point on when we talked earlier, Joel, too, about the food culture in the US. We may have had this unplanned moment where we made significant headway on our food culture compared to, say, Europe, that has a long established food culture. It's lots of recipes and traditions handed down in families and in regions. A lot of us got scrappy and learned how to do some things that maybe our grandparents did or others in our family and found connection and meaning. So something a little more meaningful than just feeling fed that night.
Absolutely. And thinking about sustainability, which for me is one of my life's missions. But if you think about back in the Great Depression era, like if you think about your grandparents, whoever's listening to this, think about your grandparents. Do they throw anything away? No, like they save everything. What is that jar in the back of their kitchen? Why do they have that knife from 80 years ago? Then we got into this mindset here in America where we were taking and kind of engorging and being pretty wasteful. And so I do feel like this has kind of slingshot us back to our grandparents' time when you really shouldn't waste things. And you see a lot of products in the eco space crushing it right now. I just saw one that launched that you put all of your food scraps in, and you press a button into this machine, and in an hour it turns into dirt, and you can just go throw it into your garden. And they just raised $2 million in 12 hours on Indiegogo. So I mean, like, it's a trend. People want to take part in it. They want to give back to the world. I think there's a part of us that feel like the pandemic is dirty, and we need to try and help clean up. And so it's important that our lettuces are treated right and that our eggs are free range and that we don't just throw away everything. I feel like there's a part of us that feels a little icky in the world right now and that is really trying to play some sort of a part into making the world, I don't know, a decent place to call home again.
I see that. And I see that in some data that we've got around consumer diet trends and preferences. We had done a study of fresh food back in the summer and looked at things that consumers cared about. And certainly this heightened sense of safety is raising all boats, if you will. People are also interested in the quality of their food. And that means, in some ways, cooking, because you're able to select your ingredients, you know where they came from. And that's probably feeding into this trend as well.
I want to jump in. I want to talk a little bit about something that I think has happened as well. And we've touched on it a little bit, but The notion of getting your products, ordering online, getting things delivered, whether it be from the grocery store, from a aggregator, or from a meal service prep, that's pretty well widely accepted as a good way to get something. What I'd be interested to say is, okay, well, now that food industry professionals like yourself, Joel, see that, what are you and your colleagues doing to figure out how to engage with these new home chefs in a way that used to be maybe the chef comes out from the back room and tells you how he or she made this dish, and if you go there enough times, you feel special because the chef knows who you are, or vice versa. But now I'm on a tablet next to the range with the grease splattering on it. How are we thinking about engaging differently, finding new avenues to inspire folks to try new things, getting that food culture going in America? That is such a blend of different things. What's happening, and how is that craft coming online over time?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bobby, and I'm glad you asked it. So for me, I've always been in consumer education. So this is kind of my world. And the past year for me, there's just been more demands to work and partner with people who want to tell their story and really want to empower people. A lot of that has been with restaurant colleagues and friends of mine who, we use the word pivot. Of course, we've all seen the restaurant down the street turn into a wine shop, or the next restaurant turn into a burger pop-up, and it used to do fine dining. That's not going to be enough. The question that everyone here listening to is, how does someone experience your food product outside of the product? So restaurants need to think the same way. How do you experience my, let's just say, Pan Asian restaurant outside of my actual table? It used to be, hey, I'll serve you. Maybe I'll have a cookbook, right? And you can take this home with you. Now it's got to be, all right, well, a lot of retailers are open-minded to prepackaged kits that have your restaurant on it. So I can go buy my favorite dish and cook it at home. A lot of restaurateurs are running their own virtual classes, which is awesome. A lot of them do some sort of meal delivery or pickup. This isn't going away. Maybe you have, or maybe you haven't heard of ghost kitchens. There's no signage, there's no entrance. It's not meant for sitting. It's meant just for delivery. So a lot of fine dining restaurants are thinking, okay, can I get a really cheap space where I don't have to advertise, and I can reach a whole different part of the city or of my region by creating these ghost kitchens? And a lot of people are doing that in their current kitchen. So you'll see restaurants who split their kitchen in half, and half is just for indoor dining and for people who come into the restaurant. And the other half serves a completely different purpose. It could be for people to come together and do a cooking club. It could be for takeout food specifically. It can be a wine bar that's meant to be like on the go for picnics. I've seen it all. So I think the key is to not think of just your physical table, but how do you extend that not only to the virtual world, but in the physical world as well? And Justin, I know you have insight based on retail and all that.
Well, some of that shows up in our data, not getting as deep into ghost kitchens, but people are interested in takeout and they want to keep that going after the pandemic. So that's definitely a bright spot. They're still maybe going to consume that food at home, but I think 40% said that they were likely to continue to do more takeout than they did back in 2019. So that's a factor. The retailers, they're of course going to want to hold on to this increased sales that they've gotten. So your grocery stores, your food producers, manufacturers that sell through those retail channels, they've got a great thing going and they want to keep it going. So I think they're going to try and tune into the consumer and how their life is evolving a little bit. As things reopen, things are going to get a little more hectic. I think they're going to want to serve consumers that are looking to make life a little bit easier when they're cooking. So that may be meal kits, that might be organizing displays around recipes, that might be helping to educate consumers about what they could be cooking or how to cook it. So I think that's going to be a major trend. And as far as we were talking about delivery, by the way, that plays into making cooking easier too. This has been around. You were able to do some curbside pickup. You were able to get food delivered from your grocery store, but many of us hadn't tried it. Maybe we were a little hesitant. We didn't want someone picking out our pears for us. We wanted to go get them ourselves. But now that consumers have tried that and a good group of us have gotten pretty comfortable with it, if I decide last minute I wanted to cook something tonight that I don't have to necessarily go shopping for it. I can just have it come to the house, and lo and behold, I'm cooking before I know it. So the barriers have come down a little bit through the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So I want to do something. It's a little bit of a break. It's a little bit of a fun question. With everybody cooking at home, including a pro like you, Joel, I always like to ask, what's a dish that you've just accepted you'll never be able to recreate at home? It either has a special place at your heart or someone just can do it better. For me, I've probably tried to make cacio e pepe, good Roman cacio e pepe at my house 150 times, and I've probably gotten it right twice. Maybe if I was all by myself and there weren't people running around, I might be able to concentrate and do it enough. But I can never get it right. So that's fine. So now if I'm at a good Italian restaurant, I'm getting the cacio e pepe. I'm having it with a nice little glass of red wine. And I still try it at home, but I know I'm never going to get it right. So I'd love to hear both of you guys, like what your dishes are.
I have a question about your cacio e pepe.
Yep.
Did what get you hooked? Did you actually go to Rome and eat it, or like did you have it one time? And like, what when you say you haven't gotten it right, what are you comparing it to?
Yeah, I had it in Rome at 3 or 4 different places that they've probably been serving it for, I don't even know, like 500 years, right?
Yeah.
So I'm comparing it that, plus also sitting in Rome with that atmosphere around you doesn't hurt, right? So that might be part of the problem that I'm, in my kitchen.
You don't have 500 years of experience
in the Midwest, not actually in Rome on a beautiful 70-degree night.
Yeah. I love it. First of all, the reason why I asked that is because the most unattainable food to home cooks is the ones that are usually connected to stories. It's typically, I had a fish that I caught wild out of the water in Alaska, and we didn't have a stove, so we just sliced it up into sashimi, and we had it, and it melted in my mouth, and I've never had sushi like that in my life. Or I was on vacation, and, it always starts with that, right? And of course you can't, because the number one seasoning to food is actually not what's on the plate, it's what's around the plate. So experiences and the outside factors of food actually seasons the food. Yeah, there you go. There you go, Bobby. So imagine food like that, just for the record, in the future. It's never going to go out of style. I mean, there's a reason why we go to the movie theater instead of rent movies, right? There's an experience connected to that. You feel it more. You're more there. You're sharing that experience with a lot of people. There's something magical about that. And same thing with restaurants. So I always hope there's a place in the world for memories like that. But for me, I'm going to go with sourdough bread. I can't, guys, I can't crack it. I don't know if it's because I don't have the patience. I talked to my starter. My wife's gotten into it. It's just bread bakers have a touch, and it's literally water and flour, possibly yeast. I can't nail it. So I don't think I'll ever nail it.
Joel, your story about the story behind the meals got me thinking about it. This is a pretty weird story, but the best thing I ever ate was a can of peaches. I had been raft camping with like a friend's family as a kid, and they didn't eat for about 12 hours. And that was the first thing I tasted, and it was the best thing I ever tasted in my life. But I am not much of a cook. Heck, I struggle with toaster pastries, I think, sometimes. So I'll just say more about my love of restaurants. There's a Japanese place here in Brookline that I frequented so much in years past that they brought me a Christmas present. There's definitely no way I'd be recreating the meals that I get at this place.
Love it.
I love it.
Well, back to business. We've, besides making me hungry, we have covered a lot of the positive benefits of cooking at home. Health, economic. We maybe not mention this, time with family, learning a new skill, sort of the thing around the table that is part of that story and that experience that you talked about, Joel. There is something unique with being around the kitchen table, not just at holidays, but every night. But there are probably some maybe unexpected challenges. What are a few just unexpected implications of the rise of the home cook, if you will, for the next few years?
I got one, and this is a completely different study, but I actually believe socialization and community building has the possibility of declining if we're all being a little bit more introverted in our homes and kind of sticking around closer to our families. And I would assume that there might be a byproduct of some sort of depression. And I don't mean in the pandemic side, I mean because we're all at home way more, because we're working at home, we're not seeing colleagues, we're not meeting people for those happy hours, we're social creatures. So I would say one thing that looks to be highly affected is our mental health. And I know for a fact that those industries are thriving. So unfortunately for us personally, it's not great, but I know those industries are thriving.
Well, Joel, you just have to invite me over for dinner. We can socialize. But I think on the whole, the positives may outweigh the negatives. But certainly, the food service industry is critical to the economy. It's critical to culture and going out and serendipity of meeting friends, and we all love it. So I don't think that cooking is going to change that dynamic. I think that that's here to stay. But with more cooking at home, that there may be some food safety issues. We all had to learn how to cook from a recipes standpoint and stuff, but proper food handling, cooking things to the right temperature, there's some educational ramp up there, but nothing jumps out as the dark side of the home cooking movement.
Spoken like a true Deloitte professional talking about food safety and risk mitigation.
Yes,
I appreciate that. So, to wrap up, I actually just want to ask you guys one open-ended question each. What is your best guess in the next 3 to 5 years of the biggest innovation in the food industry, whether it's anywhere in the food chain, from farm all the way to fork, plant-based, packaging, whatever? What do we think is something that 5 years from now will be so big that everybody couldn't ignore it? Maybe Joel, you start first.
Okay. Get ready. Throw your seatbelt on because they're going for a wild ride here in the future. So first and foremost, more people are going to be cooking than ever before, but it will be less than today. So than ever before, meaning pre-pandemic levels. So I don't believe that 50% is going to stay at 50%, but I don't think it's going to go down too far. And we're talking the next 5 years. I think restaurants are going to be kind of looked at like movie theaters were. And I go back to this analogy when VHS came out. So we kind of discovered what it would be like to experience things at home, but movie theaters didn't go anywhere. They still stayed there as an experience, as something we craved, but we all got used to watching movies at home. And I think that the convenience of now Netflix and streaming makes watching movies at home even easier. And so I think the same thing's going to happen in the food industry. I think it's going to get more convenient, easier to be creative, to use what you have, to get food delivered to you. So cooking is a cinch. What used to take 30 minutes is now going to take 15. And it's going to taste incredible. And it's going to be cheaper. And you're going to know exactly what's in it. So I truly believe in this future that food is going to become more convenient to home. And in turn, home cooks are going to stick around for the ride. And so I'm really excited to see it, super optimistic, and grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah, for my part, gosh, I'm having trouble deciding on one, but let me go with packaging, as exciting as that sounds at first. But, I work in CPG, consumer packaged goods, and I'm thinking that there's some revolutions in packaging that can happen that help us deal with things like we just had with the pandemic, when there are major shifts from, say, a food service channel that requires one kind of packaging and package size to be able to very quickly shift back to more appropriate packaging for a consumer buying food through a retail channel. There are other innovations in packaging to preserve freshness of fresh food, and hopefully also innovations in the sustainability of packaging, less waste caused from packaging, recyclable packaging, and packaging that kind of dissolves away in water. So that's one area. I'm also very interested in plant-based foods and the exciting stuff that's going on there, both for sustainability reasons, but also for taste and for new ways of providing tasty calories to the world. So that's another area of interest that I think we should keep our eyes on over the next 5 years.
Nice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground: food puns, experience, sustainability, the health and wealth benefits of cooking at home. We even got, you heard it here first, prediction of the Roaring 20s start date. So really great conversation. Perfect that it's around 6 p.m. Eastern time and I can start to think about dinner right now. But I want to thank both Joel, you, and Justin for joining. If you want to keep up with Joel on any social platform, you can find him and on joelgamoran.com. You could also take a free cooking class. I will do that with him or any of the other pro chefs over at withhomemade.com. Also, if you'd like to read the full report and dive into some of the data that Justin covered, just visit Deloitte.com and search for post-pandemic food story. And you can also check out all the great research that we've published, and Justin's been involved in a lot of that as well. So again, thank you guys all for tuning in, and look forward to joining us on our next episode of That Makes Sense. You can listen on your favorite podcatcher, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. Simply search for That Makes Sense. Connect with me on social media, Bobby Stevens on LinkedIn or at Bobby Stevens on Twitter. This presentation contains general information only, and Deloitte is not, by means of this presentation, rendering accounting, business, financial, investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice or services. This presentation is not a substitute for such professional advice or services, nor should it be used as a basis for any decision or action that may affect your business. Before making any decision or taking any action that may affect your business, you should consult a qualified professional advisor. Deloitte shall not be responsible for any loss sustained by any person who relies on this presentation.